But we talk about Mentos a lot, huh?
Who doesn't?
We just love Mentos.
People younger than us.
It's part of the zeitgeist. You can't not.
Okay. So we're good. We're all good.
So we're good.
All right.
Great. So our purpose in gathering together this time is to talk about how did season 2 go? What did we like? What did we not like? What might we want to change whenever we return to this particular band of weirdos again? So I don't have a ton of organizing questions, but I have a few. We can just start with what did we like? What do we think worked well? What do we think we might want to change in the future? I have a couple of specific things to get to process along if we need to, but why don't we just start there? What worked? What was good about season 2?
I think the party worked really well together. It felt like it was a really balanced party. It felt like everybody had something to contribute. They had their own like niche to kind of fill in, both story wise, and I think, and like class wise. Like I think story wise, everybody had a really interesting story and cool flashbacks to get into, and there were nice mysteries set up for every single character, which was cool.
And the both individual characters and the party dynamics came out very different from the old Bones crew, which I'm happy about.
Yeah, I was worried about that when we started this season, and everybody kind of had a different thing going on, which is cool.
And like, I think everybody was weird enough to still need to be dependent on everyone else, if you know what I mean. Like,
right.
There was no point where I was like, oh, this character can just walk away with this situation because like we all have drastic problems.
That's true, although it is funny given that yours is the character who...
Yeah, I did literally walk away from the situation.
Yes, but I think that the fact that Rikashi was, if anything, like the least constitutionally equipped for this adventure, only because like really angry about not being in a city.
Yeah.
I think that helped to me kind of justify like, why is she hanging around? Why isn't she just leaving? She doesn't have that much explicit buy-in to the other people in the team. And the answer is, well, where's she going to go?
Yeah.
Like she kind of probably needs their help to get away.
Yeah. Like
and
it's handy to have a bunch of glass cannons around you, even if they're not very glass.
Once we rejoined the party, like I think the fact that Rikashi was far and away the one most like actively attempting to figure out how we could leave does make sense from a character standpoint.
Yeah.
And the fact that everybody else is just like, well, shit, I was already doing something I didn't really want to be doing. And I can sort of do that thing still here. Like,
yeah.
Everybody else was poking random buttons and touching random meat flowers, and
but I like that it's not because we were like, oh, we want to stay in this setting, so we have to invent like causes for our characters to feel like doing that. Literally, all of the rest of us had some motivating mission that, character-wise, we did not feel like was less important than like not being on a horrible island.
Yeah. Whereas Rikashi, like motivationally, is just like, if we can get out of this, I can just disappear.
Right.
Like, at this point, she's like, okay, I don't have to go back to Greyhawk. I can just pick a city and not exist anymore.
Like, that whole dynamic, I don't think was intentional at all, but it played out in a way that worked well, I think. So I was happy about that.
Yeah.
Kelly, I really like the way you both incorporated everyone's sort of backstory in ways that were super interesting and super compelling. And I think I also really like the way all the flashback episodes that we did tied into the current story really nicely. And I also really like that we got to do our own little mini flashbacks that just sort of like built on our own characters or embellished the moment. I thought that was a really neat dynamic.
And riffing on that, the fact that we had a setup where the characters were familiar with each other, but not like a dedicated party worked well for that, both because it's given us a lot of fun stuff that we can just establish on screen about how they related to one another, and because it kind of leaves us in the situation where we can like us not realizing something about somebody else is totally reasonable, but we still have this ability to delve into like, oh, did these guys do something together in the past that's interesting in some way?
Yeah, there's a lot of room to develop both retroactively and going forward.
Mm-hmm. It's kept the dynamics both explorable and flexible.
Yes. Yeah. And it gave me, like, I don't know how anybody else approached this, but at least on my side, a lot of this I kind of thought about, and I guess everybody did this because we did like kind of the informal relationship statements when we were doing character generation. But I kind of thought about like, okay, what is my relationship to each of these characters? And that's kind of put in the position where, one, I could move forward and be like, okay, I know how Ash reacts to this person, but also I could try to explore that. Mm-hmm. So like I have some ideas about like the backstory of why Ash is like gets along a little bit less well with Balmo than everyone else. I want to keep kind of exploring that. And that's even made for good opportunities where, you know, he's kind of had to grow in his opinion of Balmo as he's seen how we've all gotten along on the island and everything. And that's been fun to do.
Yeah. And also like in the Balmo Rakashi Darbin flashbacks, Balmo and Rakashi grew a little bit closer. So I think next time around we might have to do some flashbacks to explore why at the beginning of this adventure they seem to be much more at odds.
Yeah.
Like what was the falling out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might be fun to play around with. I mean, I just want to say for the flashback stuff in general, like this was one of the areas that I wanted to talk about. We've already sort of found our way there naturally. You know, I thought it would be a cool idea to try, but I definitely did not necessarily know how it would pan out. And I think that everyone in the playgroup has just taken to it really well, right? Like this is just proven to be a really fun mechanical device.
Yeah.
In terms of giving opportunities to add color to things, sometimes to establish plot significant stuff, but often just to do neat shit, basically.
And it's done a lot of heavy lifting to make the combat scenes more dynamic.
Yeah.
Because we get both a lot of good gags and a lot of good dramatic moments out of stuff that comes out of the flashbacks.
Yeah, I mean, especially... So, I mean, one of the things that I would say needed change over time and probably even still needs more attention is the combat, right? Like the combat in D&D is just grindingly slow. We made some changes midway through to make it go faster that I think were big improvements. They probably could still use some stuff to streamline it. Because any major fight is still kind of a slog.
I think part of that is still sort of baked in 4E because it's got that like it's very like meant to be on a table, but it's
tactical,
also it's very tactical, and it also every move is like 3 different moves. Which like requires you to stop and puzzle out how and like sort of spiral out every single effect. And also in like, it's just something I've been thinking about. It removes a degree of the decision making because you're not forced to say, do I want to give up my attack to do a heal? Do I want to give up this to do that? Because generally you're doing at least 2 things at once.
Yeah. So that's not 4th E, that's actually changes that I made. So I take responsibility there. You know, maybe we can think some more about if there are ways to streamline it further. But anyways, just to underline again what Josh was saying, like it has made the combats interesting in a way they couldn't have been.
Absolutely.
And in terms of the combat stuff, I do think what was I saying? I do think the max damage has been beneficial there just because it makes the number of actions that it takes to resolve a fight go down dramatically, which is pretty good. I do think that one of the challenges we have, and this kind of gets into the 4E thing a little bit again.
Sorry, I'm going to pause to recite this to the listeners. Jeff just disappeared from our call and in Slack reports, quote, daughter unplugged router.
What I was going to say is, you know, like and this is, I guess this is another topic that we can kind of veer into, but like, I think the whole sphere grid thing has worked out really well in terms of erasing the thing that I think most of us didn't like about Vanilla 4E, which is like really tight segmentation per character, while maintaining the thing that I know at least I like about it, which is the kind of conceptual division of actions and powers into these different types of areas that you want coverage of as a party. And I think that that's played out well to let everybody kind of define themselves cleanly without having to just be like, oh, I am the guy who does the heals and that's the only like thing. But I was realizing this in a couple of the most recent fights because of how I spec myself out and how everybody else is that we are kind of low on AoE. And I think that actually has a significant impact on combat length because we go into these fights with a lot of mooks, and compare the Obliviax fight where I happened to be positioned in such a way that I could clear out a ton of Vegapygmies, and then somebody else did too, like all within the first round, versus this last fight where getting through the lower level guys was a huge struggle on top of dealing with the wizards. That's not unreasonable necessarily, but it does make it, that is, I think, a factor that contributes to slower combat.
Yeah. I mean, I also think in terms of encounter design, like as a thing to think about going forward, like having a lot of mooks doesn't necessarily add a lot in most of our situations to like drama. Like specifically like the Vegapygmy fight, they just got cleared out. Whereas in the later fight, we sort of just had them there. And like they were sort of unnamed in terms of like the way we would refer to them.
Are you talking about the last fight we just had?
Yeah.
Because for me, that was the opposite. That was the mooks were making it scary for me, mainly because I was up in the front lines, and then all of a sudden there were a ton of goblins around me, and then I died. Like there was like there was so much threat there.
That's true.
You know, if it had just been the named guys, it would have been a lot less terrifying. And I
also,
think.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, conceptually, I don't think we would have all had nearly as much of an oh shit reaction as we did if it had just been the free made guys.
That's true.
Even though we knew that they were all scary. It was the fact that this whole group showed up and we were just like, oh, we did not play this correctly.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I think just visually, right, the image of like us facing an army of people is more, cinematically compelling.
And in this case, verisimilitude wise, like we'd been kind of informally tracking like how many people are left in the camp this whole time. So it makes sense that like the population of goblinoids that weren't dead yet would show up. It's been Chekhov's several score of goblinoids,
Yes.
So I guess in neither of the cases here would I really change anything about that, but I do think it does potentially make sense to kind of try to veer naturally away from having quite as many like large quantity of combatants fights in the future,
or to like abstract them and just be like, there are X goblins here, this move handles Y number of goblins, and almost like treat them like a swarm.
And it might just be worth it for me to get a little bit to delve a little bit into the AoE area, because that's something that's kind of plausible with my power set,
and that is something you can always stunt in.
I mean, Josh especially, but really almost all the characters, it doesn't actually take that much stunt to get a good area of effect going, especially if it already has like a limited area of effect. Changing a burst to a blast, or is that right?
That's one thing. Could we maybe change the terminology on those?
Right, that's a good point.
Burst and blast is literally the worst thing about Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. I'm not even exaggerating. It's so frustrating.
It's saying a whole lot.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just distracted by the fact that Kacey has a cat with hair now.
That's been true for a little while. There's other ones without hair, but
sorry,
this one is broken in a different way.
All broken in unique and different ways. But this actually, so that I appreciate the feedback about like basically mobs and how to make sure that that we only deal with mobs in ways that are interesting, which I do agree is important.
I feel like possibly Dungeon World might have some rules to steal for that, or ways to approach that.
It might. I mean, to some degree, we would be playing Dungeon World if I hadn't had this idea I thought was cool for using 4E. But even then, we probably would still be playing Dungeon World if you could play Dungeon World and roll D20s. It's not D&D if you're not rolling D20s.
Right.
So,
and how much like battleground tactics are in Dungeon World?
Like none.
Yeah, 0.
The map positioning is not a thing.
Because it does kind of make it an interesting challenge to be flanked by anybody, even a little goblin mook.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that D&D 4th edition does really well, is all that tactical movement, distilling that down to something relatively simple. It's just the format's tough, right? Like
yeah.
You know, D&D was kind of designed to sit down for 4 hours and play it, and you know, it's harder if you're doing it like an hour or 2 hour sessions.
Also, it's an audio podcast,
right?
And not everybody can look at that map.
I think we do in the future, when using maps, need to be a little more thoughtful about referring to things in visual or contextual ways rather than pointing at them.
Definitely, I agree. We should be thinking about how we can do that more effectively. This ties into I think my main other point I wanted to touch on and explore and discuss, like probably the major other big idea, right? Which was, my goal with this game is that it's a sandbox, right? I am not providing you with rails. I'm not even really
except for
planning
the rail system.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No. There's a great rail system if you want to make use of that.
But it just takes you to other parts of the sandbox.
But you didn't put us on it.
That's right. You did not choose to get on it, and that's fine.
But it's the Disneyland tour tram like circuits where the whole island is the rest of the park.
That is pretty darn accurate. Right? But like, I'm week to week, I'm not like planning out, okay, so this is what's going to happen in the next episode. Well, I mean, I have a sense of where they're going, so I make sure that I have things prepped in the directions that I'm expecting. But that is, I think, an unusually high level of player freedom. I've been fascinated by the choices you've made. So from my perspective, it's rad, but it does mean that I have less control than I might otherwise have over things like, what's the encounter design? Because to some degree, you're picking the encounters, right?
Like letting Obliviex out.
Well, and that's kind of where I was getting with the, like, we had a lot of, like, in particular, we had a lot of opportunities to just not deal with the Scarlet Brotherhood anymore. And I think it's really just the fact that we hated them because they're evil, violent racists that kind of forced our hand in picking a big fight with them. So, like,
right.
I thought about that probably 3 weeks running. I was like, do we just want to decide to leave those guys alone? And I'm like, no, Ash is just like not interested in that. He just wants to fucking kill these guys.
Also, now Kacey's very hairy cat has transmogrified into a very hairless dog.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of animals.
How many animals? We're not telling.
No.
Don't tell the state of Ohio.
More than you think.
I think the sandbox thing has worked pretty well. Like, you know, I don't know. Maybe anybody else is just like, oh my God, they're spending so much time in the fucking cube. But like,
I love the cube. I never wanted to leave the cube.
I found that really entertaining. It was interesting to explore. The spaces that were in it were fun and informative, and like there was a lot of stuff to find out there. There were a lot of mysteries to puzzle over. And, you know, we eventually got to the point where we could kind of build it up to this big dramatic climax of what we were dealing with there. It wasn't just like we sat around in this cube for a million years and then nothing ever happened again.
Right, which is I'll say, like, most of the sandbox games that I play usually end up that way, where it's just like, okay, I guess we're done here, and there's not really any resolution. It's like, I think Kelly did a really good job about giving characters momentum rather than like the game momentum. It felt like there were things to discover, things to accomplish, and I feel like we accomplished them, even though it may not have been his plan, which is not my usual experience. Like, I play them and it's like, okay, we're in this place and some stuff is happening, but it doesn't relate to anything. And it's like, you know, why did I do that? I don't understand. And that all that story was tied in so nicely to the sandbox that, there's a lot of good reasons to stay in that cube, at least for my character. And a lot of, good reasons to hate the Scarlet Brotherhood. And Like, I think all of our actions were justified, but also the story itself was interesting in the way that our actions related back to what was going on there. So,
and it does legitimately feel like there's this kind of like that's the other thing, is that sometimes you can create a like a sandboxy or open world type environment where it's like, oh, okay, well, I could go anywhere, but it's like there's that one mountain, and then there's like a bunch of spots that are just going to have like the generic quest NPC and like, you know, kill 5 boars or whatever. And it legitimately felt like there were like a lot of places that were going to be very weird and probably have very different play experiences that we had the choice of going between. And then we didn't take any of them. We got arrested instead. But but it's like we could very clearly have, like, I don't think anybody feels like we couldn't have just ended by just being like, oh, okay, we're going to hop the rail system and go to the priest, or not the priest, I guess, to one of the ones that it's okay to go to, or whatever. That seemed that seemed entirely viable. And I kind of expect once we come back to the setting that we're going to probably want to go see some of those places, because there's a lot of weird and interesting stuff going on around them. So,
I feel like the pacing overall, it was actually really nice. I mean, I never felt like we had an episode where I was like, oh, we're really dragging, except for occasionally combat where I'm like, okay, well, this episode's just going to be a continuation of the fight. Like with the Froghemoth, right? We had 3 episodes that were basically the fight, but that was the first time we'd done combat, and that's what we realized we needed to kind of change it. But other than that, I think, you know, it seemed like everything kind of progressed very dynamically and very naturally, and we spent a lot of time in the cube, but it was a really weird, complicated space. So it wasn't like we were standing in one corner. Like, there was a lot to explore within that. It was almost like going to a different island.
It was figuring out a rule set. It was like, okay, we have to figure out what the rules of this new game that we're playing is, which was cool.
Right.
Like, it was, you know, the way that the cube had folded and turned into all these different spaces and how those spaces relate to each other. Like, there was a lot of cool stuff going on there.
Yeah, and we weren't entirely sure we weren't going to die if we walked through any given doorway.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
I think we did a good job on that. In terms of kind of playing out, like, seriously, like, how should you spelunk something like this? I think the place that we actually dragged the most was probably in the first session, because it took a while for us to kind of get enough context to keep moving. That's kind of the downside of the character-driven thing in the open world, is that it's like, we've got to get the premise situated, which took a while, and we've got to feel out how everybody relates to each other. So I kind of felt like once we got through that, it all kind of accelerated nicely.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody else has their own experience, and I have literally no feedback on it from actual listeners. But I think the opening episode is one of the most listenable episodes of this podcast, just because each character gets a significant moment to like shine and show something very particular about themselves. So it's not as integrated as the rest of the game is, but it is, I think, good radio.
Yeah, I think I actually...
I like the structure.
I think I brought that up just like in the Slack or something at some point after we played it. Because I waited probably... Since I was busy re-listening to the first season, I waited probably 10 episodes or something to get back in and re-listen to this one. And it was kind of astonishing how much different the episode played in retrospect as like, you know, a recorded thing than it did when we were actually going through it. Because you're right. And I do think it comes together very nicely there.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the way we talk about positioning during combat, to be mindful of our listeners. And I think just like making, not just because there are people listening, but also because like it's more interesting from like what kind of story are we trying to tell perspective if we actually sort of talk through the positioning a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think that sort of extends to any situation in which we're dealing with a map. Is to sort of think about something more descriptive rather than this door, that door, north door, south door.
Move over here.
Necessarily.
I'm gonna move over here.
We've had some unusual situations where like the cube is a mostly blank space.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit challenging to describe different pieces of it in interesting ways. When we've been looking at the area maps, I've had to be cagey about things like what's north and what's south.
Yeah.
So we're moving. I anticipate that we're moving out of those particular situations because while other locations of the Chimera are are certainly not maybe not conventional. Nothing is quite as neutral as the princess. Everything else is at least a little bit more weird or differently weird. So I think that there are going to be fewer impediments to that in the future. But it's good to keep track of and point to. I want to look at some ways to speed up combat a little bit more, even if that's just looking at things strategically in terms of how we approach combat as a play group. Yeah, other things that we think could work better in the future, or we might want to consider revising for the next time we return to this. Or just things we want to make sure we do, right? I mean, I'm curious to know what's your big question?
Oh man, there's so many.
There are. That's true.
I mean, mostly my fear is that with the, breadth of world creation that you've done and the multitude of kind of options and sub options and paths that we could take, that we're going to finish and not have gotten to do everything,
I mean, I think that's almost certain. So it's inherent to the work that I've done. It's
and the completionist gamer in me is dying at that prospect.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I can maybe even think if we want to get really, depending on how far down the rabbit hole we go, there might be some opportunities to find some narrative justifications for some of the ways in which you actually get to the 100% completion rate in an RPG, right?
Right.
I can think of some ways we might be able to do that. It'll get weird. I'm not against that.
Kelly's face when he said that was amazing.
This is why you joined the Chimera Project, Balmo.
I needed to find the last of the river trophies.
That is probably my number one question.
I think so. Yeah, I think my personal gaming style will inform the character in this instance.
I think in terms of big questions, I don't think I can even drill it down to a really narrowly defined single question. That's tough. I think the closest
I can just what the fuck is going on?
Yes. I think the closest I can get is who assembled the Chimera Project and why, which is technically two questions, but they're two tightly related questions at least.
Yeah. This is sort of why it's fun for me to be playing a character who is low intelligence, low wisdom, and fundamentally uncurious. Because in situations where everyone's puzzling things out, I can just be no, I want to blow this all off.
Whereas we've established that Ash is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
So, did we ever specifically tell Rikashi that the what do you call it? The collision chamber, the reactor chamber is made out of astral diamonds?
No, I don't think she's heard that term.
Okay.
Maybe not.
Possibly for the best.
Yeah.
Although Rikashi has not shown herself to be
particularly covetous,
that greed oriented.
Rikashi has a very particular attitude towards treasure, which has not come up. Or part of it has, in that you have definitely not noticed her being just generically acquisitive. But there's some more details that I have in mind.
I think it came up a little bit in the armory.
Oh yeah, but that's
when we found
useful.
the laser guns. Yeah.
That's not treasure, that's murder tools.
Right.
And
That's
practical.
different.
If anybody's gonna have success using a laser gun, it's probably Rikashi.
Yeah. That's more disregard for the needs of others.
Yeah.
But all that said, I'm not sure any of us have moved that far past the overarching mystery of, again, what the fuck is the Chimera Project, and then our each individual kind of Kickstart mystery, all of which I think got some additional information, but not nearly enough to solve.
Yeah. I think outside of those, my main curiosity is how the F that Chimera card became part of the game.
Yeah,
that's sort of
world without
that's sort of my favorite mystery.
I still don't know how you disappeared the fucking pen.
Playing D&D, the Mandala effect.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's my favorite mystery because it's so banal. Just what a pointless magic thing to have happened Why the fuck would that happen?
Yeah. And it causes us so much grief. Like,
yeah,
you're collecting some pretty good data points because you've had opportunities now to ask a couple of different NPCs about whether there's a chimera in Three Dragon Ante,
whether there's a chimera in space,
and who was? I think who was the one that said no, there wasn't.
Oh, speaking of Three Dragon Ante, did you see that there's a Kickstarter for a new Three Dragon Ante box set?
Oh shit!
No,
really?
I didn't.
Yes.
Man, we'll have to partner with them.
Sorry, Casey.
So I think, Casey, that you are thinking of Darbin.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was the only one that we've asked so far that has agreed that that's not a thing. And every other person we've asked so far has been like, of course it's a thing.
But we haven't gone to ask, like, we didn't stop the fight to be like, hey, Scarlet Brotherhood people, is there a chimera card in Three Dragon Ante? Which I feel like would be the useful triangulation information at this point.
Boy, I really should have looked for a deck in their quarters.
Oh, shit, you really should have.
Ah, yeah.
Damn it, Rikashi.
There's still time.
Again, fundamentally uncurious.
I think Darbin's the only person that hasn't been on the ship that we were able to ask.
Right.
So, yeah.
Might be true.
Unless you count the princess a person, and I kind of don't.
Demirtha seemed to think that nothing was amiss, right?
Yeah.
Yes, but she was on the ship.
Her and everyone else on the Brass Ox seemed to think it was totally normal.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember if there's anyone we asked besides Darbin who wasn't on the ship who was like, no, that's really normal. But I don't think so.
No. I don't think we thought to ask Yibdub.
Yeah, probably not.
No.
Any thoughts on like role-playing character course correction or development? Or I guess I said course correction because that was just on my mind with the finale. That like I think I might have to ascribe Balmo's sudden rush into the fray as a little bit him trying to get away from this prophetic, future version of himself. To say like, that can't be me because I'm about to die here.
That's kind of how I read it. So I think that certainly works. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, and I think I discussed this a little bit earlier, like there was definitely a period, it took a little while for me to kind of feel like I had a full grasp character-wise. Like, I had some like relationship setup that I liked early on, but in terms of actually kind of finding a motivating kind of like through line, I guess it took me a while. But I feel like eventually that kind of came together. So I feel better about that going forward at least.
One thing that I am concerned about with Sir Simeon is his quest for Callista kind of paints him into a corner when it comes to the rest of the party and the decisions that the rest of the party makes. Like if they ever decide to go somewhere that is not in that direction, I feel like I'd almost have to bow Sir Simeon out. Which is something I was really worried we were going in that direction in the cube for a little while. And then we kind of course corrected on that, but it's something I'm curious as to what we will end up doing with him, because finding a reason for him to go do something else that isn't in that direction when he's so close now, I just don't know if he can do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's always options. I did nope out for 3 full episode cycles.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we have already an example of one of the main characters doing that, and it worked out. And it was okay. Right. And in fact, I mean, just
it turned out really good.
Right. Mm-hmm. It was, I thought it was a compelling storytelling opportunity. And from a production point of view, it was actually really good for the game.
From a player standpoint, like, I think splitting up like that is interesting. I, in the future, would probably avoid doing it for quite so long.
Yeah, I would too.
That's largely my own fault.
Yeah, and it was only like a little bit longer than I think it should have been.
Yeah, I just mean in terms of the pace of our recording and play periods.
Right.
Like I think I would have wanted to have been more involved had I.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If something like that happened again, so here are a few things. I want to follow the fiction, right? I want us to be truthful to the characters we're portraying and not overly worry about the consequence, about following consequences of natural actions. So there are different possibilities, like we follow Sar Simeon separately for a little while, and maybe there's opportunities for things to come back together. I'm comfortable with the idea that we might have to replace a character at one point or another. I've got space in here for that. It's not like you're not in a sealed environment, so there's definitely ways in and out to do that.
I mean, again, looking at the source material, like Lost turns over like 6 characters every season.
Yeah.
So
right, that's not hard. So I think it's worth paying attention to. I wouldn't be overly bothered about it. And also just in terms of how much, Callista's, it's now, you now have enough information that Callista's very deeply involved in whatever's going on, right? Like she's not peripheral. So there are a lot of different ways to follow her mystery and still
be doing that.
It's not like there's one path, right? It's like, here's the Callista path, and then there's 5 other doors. It's more like, there's 6 doors, and at least 5 of them probably have an obvious connection at this point.
Yeah. And probably the thing that was going to have the most like of a branching thing there was the princess, and we've kind of covered that pretty thoroughly. So
yeah, I think you've explored the princess pretty thoroughly. So I would think Sar Simeon is relatively satisfied that
there's
there's
totally
not a lot of other leads here.
I do think it would be worth at least kind of keeping our eye on for the next season, just trying to find some secondary motivations for people. Again, just to kind of like diversify like what excuses we have to do different things. But I do think that would be good.
Yeah, and there are a couple of things that are on the table that haven't quite reached fruition yet appropriately. So, I mean, the locket is definitely one of those things. That's definitely another shoot a drop situation whenever Ash comes across the fact that
I'm so curious about what's going to happen when we get there.
Which is good because I have so zero plans of ever taking that thing out of my pocket.
Yes, but you've just been arrested. Frankly, just the way that this season has ended, which I guess I wouldn't say I 100% had no idea it would end this way, but it definitely was not anywhere near like the top 3 or 4 things that I would have guessed. Opens up some fascinating narrative opportunities. I mean, I did all this work on Drow Society that I definitely that was 100% stuff I expected to sit on the shelf. And now maybe we're going to get to explore it some more. So that's exciting for me.
What I really liked about how that played out is just like, I've watched all of the, I feel like at this point, all of the different like low budget Canadian sci-fi shows. And this is how they all love to end seasons, because it gives them so much opportunity to kind of figure out how they want to reset the decks. Like, I think season 1 of Dark Matter literally ends like this. Like, they just all get arrested and marched off somewhere. And so then it's like, oh, we have no idea what's going to happen next, because it just totally changed the context.
And I think that's how, like, at least half the seasons of Lost end.
Yes, definitely. So it's good from that sense, because it does feel like a good opportunity of like, oh, like, what are we going to have when we get back? What kind of stuff are we going to explore? Like, anything that we want to shift around about how stuff is working, it's a very good break to do that. So I'm happy about that.
Cool.
So I am curious. Obviously, like, a lot of it is going to be spoiler laden, and you're not going to want to go into any details. But I am curious the impression from your side about the path that we wound up on versus some of the paths that you considered more likely for us to take.
Yeah, same, because this path seems to have been very obvious to me.
This feels like the clearest way to go. So
you really didn't have to go to the princess at all. Like, you totally could have chosen to try and get off of Monster Island. There were other avenues to potentially explore there. So that's one answer. And to some degree, some of this is like, I envisioned other things. Some of it's just like, I didn't predict enough how long things were going to take. Right. I mean, I said at the beginning, right, that I thought that, there were things that I thought would take one game that took 10, right? Like, it's not my ability to predict timing on things is not necessarily awesome. So like you didn't have to go to the princess at all. You could have like made a boat or found another boat or done a bunch of different, like use magic, whatever. Go to one of the other lesser islands, try to get to the main island. There's a whole bunch of stuff, which maybe at some point you'll get to explore about the native population.
And if any of us had any kind of survival skills, we might have done that.
That's true, right? We ended up with no primal source characters and like this gang of urbanites, which wasn't completely by design, but I think works beautifully.
Made a beeline for the thing that looks the most like a city.
Right.
What I was going to say,
it's a giant cube floating in the sky. How could you not want to go there?
In terms of us,
plus, like,
go ahead.
But like, Latchkey sees it and gets an image of like, oh, I've been here before. They're going to be like, screw that. Right. They want to explore that aspect of themselves as well.
But what I was thinking about is like, we're all like, this felt like such a natural direction to go in. And it's like, on the one hand, it's like, okay, at the point that we see the cube with the Scarlet Brotherhood camped underneath it, like, I think at that moment, to my mind, it's inevitable that we go into the cube, just given who's in the party and what information we have and what happens from that point onwards. But what's not inevitable is like even the idea that we went into the jungle the way that we did. Because we did that because we made one specific choice about how to flee from
the giant robot.
From the giant robot, from the apparatus of Qualish, is that it?
Yep.
And then another choice once we ran into Yibdab of how to follow up on the information we got from him. And either of those points, we really could just have gone off in a completely different direction very easily. And that's only really apparent to me now that I'm talking this out, because at the time it just seemed like, obviously we're going into, we like that all felt like it felt naturally. But
Yep, that's very true. Once you got in, so part of it, I think it's significant that the party split happened when you entered the cube, which is not something I didn't anticipate it. Although, again, I think it was completely naturalistic for characters, and I think it ended up working out in a really interesting way. So I'm all for it. But I think the fact that the party split then may have influenced the way that you engage with the cube, because rather than going for a depth exploration on the cube, you could have you could have spent more time exploring the teleportation platforms and done like more shallow exploration of multiple sites instead of being really focused on the princess. Right. Similarly, when you found the connection to the rail network, you could have just explored, like started looking into that. Right. So there's a bunch of avenues there. You didn't necessarily have to be it was great, but you didn't have to be focused on exploring the princess basically until we've exhausted every avenue here.
Right.
Even the way you interface with Obliviacs, there are other things there are other directions that could have gone. That might have opened up different.
And that makes sense. I didn't think about that, but it does make sense that like knowing that Rakashi didn't come in definitely, I think, had a subconscious effect of kind of keeping us like, okay, we'll explore this spot,
but not too far,
in a way that wouldn't have happened if we had all got in. So I think that's true. That was more dramatically relevant than it seemed like it might be at the time.
Or if you all decided not to go in, right? If you held back and taken your time and like collectively done what Rakashi was doing, hanging out around the outside of the cube and harrying the camp and collecting information, Darbin still would have shown up.
Right.
So if the whole party had encountered Darbin, it would have been a very different experience, and you might have made use of Darbin's information and gone in a different direction. So like there's other avenues there.
This is interesting to me because like trying to get a sense of like what things we did that were consequential. I don't know. It feels like it's good to have in terms of like how we approach any of this when we come back to it.
You also, and this is, maybe I should think about if there's ways that I can like supply a little bit more support in this direction, but we have at least 2 members of the party who have ritual access, right? I've been very vague about what rituals can do because I basically said, okay, they're just a repository for stunts. Like they're not things that function in combat, so we don't need to get really detailed about how they operate. But like no one's tried to do like a commune or a find the path or some other use of intensive, maybe difficult magic that could just kind of create a narrative avenue for you, which is that's pretty common in D&D, especially by like middle to high power level, which is where you are at this point.
Though I feel like along with this also goes with the like a bunch of urbanites stuck on a random island thing in terms of like how we think about approaching the problems that we have.
No, absolutely. It's not. It's definitely not a knock on you at all. I'm just trying to say, like, to some degree, I think the way you phrased it, Josh, is like you're looking at what are the places where branching options occurred and like where you made significant decisions, and those are all real things. But it's not so much that I like sat down and mapped things out and thought, okay, there's going to be a decision point here, there's going to be a decision point there. Right. It's more like I created a situation where I knew there were going to be some decision points. I've tried to make sure that there are enough that it's not rails without me meaning there to be rails. And I just sort of trust the characters have enough capacity that I can actually predict what all of you are going to do. So just sort of know that like that's one of the things that I've got factored in is created solutions that come up because the players are creative and the characters are powerful. That's also just one of the sources of branching options.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Okay. I have really just one last question, although we can keep talking as long as people want to. But my last question is, does anybody want to lay down a pet theory about anything? And obviously, I know we've got a general consensus. The big picture feels completely opaque. But is there anything in particular that you have, like, oh, I think it's this thing about that thing, or
I think, okay, I'm gonna put a penny down here. I think that we somewhere, and I guess probably the changeover would have started in like one of the flashbacks or something, but somewhere we shifted tracks from the universe where, like, I'm imagining kind of like a loopy time thingy where there's one timeline where the Chimera Project doesn't...
A Jeremy Bearimy?
Yeah. One timeline where the Chimera Project doesn't exist. And then in the future it is created, and it goes back and creates a splinter timeline where it exists from some point in the past. And my guess is that we shifted from the first of those to the second of those. And that's what the difference is that's kind of referenced by the Chimera card. So that's my theory that I'm going to lay down. I have no idea why that would be the case or how, unless Balmo did it. Because, again, Balmo is either the latest or tied for the latest of all of the characters we know associated with the story in terms of when they are in the standard temporal order. So if the idea is that somebody invented this and only went back in time to recruit people, it would have to be, I think, either Balmo or the Elf Queen or them in concert doing that.
I see, because you mean all the other members of the Chimera Project are older than them.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Right.
And I was also going to say, like, I totally agree with Josh. There's some timey-wiminess going on here. I'm not entirely sure, like, what form it's taking, but there's far too many things temporally that just don't make sense. So something happened at some point, and we got pulled along with it. Also interesting, I forgot we're supposed to end the world, aren't we? We're supposed to cause the end of the world?
We don't know anything about the causal factor, like the nature of what will cause the world to end in that circumstance, or in what way we are involved with it, except that us being there in some way makes it either more likely or more obvious that it is.
And we have a prophecy checklist.
Yes, which we've...
Right.
So you've got the prophecy checklist, and you have Darbin's concern, which may or may not have any relationship to the prophecy.
Right. But, like, there are different scenarios, like, we directly cause it intentionally, we cause it unintentionally, somebody else causes it intentionally and they need us in some way to do that, or a series of events like conspire based on kind of kismet, basically, to cause it to happen, which are pretty significantly different from one another, and none of which is really off the table in terms of the actual process of world ending. Really, the only thing that we have established is that it's not Wolf.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of seems like the difference, like might be one universe Haramathur, is that right? Died in the Dawn War, and maybe this Isle of Dread is from a place where Haramathur did not die. I don't know.
Oh yeah, and there's the whole mirrors thing, and Mara being the backwards Haramathur, so like maybe we're dealing with like a goatee dimension situation instead, or in addition.
Well, you got the Chimera looking at all the mirror shards, right? Like that's a really,
which is Haramathur / Rudamara,
right?
Until proven otherwise, I would say.
But he was rooting for us, right? Like he's frustrated.
He's frustrated about something. I'm not sure if that's because like we got arrested and he didn't want us to, or like that was supposed to take something that was supposed to happen was going to bring him a step closer to getting through his mirror shards, but that didn't work, or like something didn't go according to his plan. But I think it's a bit of a stretch to assume that it's him like cheering for our team and he was angry that the
I thought he was
us.
cheering for us. I'm going to keep thinking he was cheering for us.
Same.
But yeah, it took us way too long to figure that one out. I feel it's a little.
It was right there the whole time.
I know.
Yeah, there's an extra H in there though.
Yeah, it's like reading fucking American Gods and not realizing Loki Lysmith was Loki because it was text and not verbalized, and I like, wow, I felt dumb. But that's what made it good. And this was sort of the opposite. Like I kept hearing it and I never saw it. And so not seeing it, I didn't like turn it around.
Cool.
Yeah. I want to, here's my other rando question. I want to know what was happening in that flashback party with all the mirrors covered. Like what was actually happening down in, like what was that deal?
Yeah,
I am positive that ties into everything somehow, but
do we even know
what the hell was going on there?
Do we even know who the weird guys who showed up with the stagecoach are?
The bird head guys?
Yeah.
Bird skull head guys? No, we have not seen anything like that.
That definitely felt like people who were like calling in from like Game Line C, you know, like it's like, and part of what makes that so uncanny and like disturbing is that it feels just a little bit off from what I would expect like a Greyhawk D&D like monster or species or whatever to kind of look like. So it does kind of feel like, oh, like what the fuck is this? Why is it here?
Yeah. And it doesn't correspond to the like white cube style of the other weird magic shows.
Yeah.
Right. But this is a thing that happens every year. The mirrors always get covered. Something has to happen. They can't be like, there's some maintenance of something that ties into all of it that's going on, but I don't.
I'm having trouble remembering when this occurred.
This was the first Rakashi flashback episode.
Oh, okay.
So this is when Rakashi was like 16 or so? Yeah.
Yes, very, very early in Rakashi's career.
Also where the concept of Rudamara is introduced.
Yeah, and like Org's been gone for however many years. So what's been going on in that interim? Like has someone else been doing this thing? Or is something like breaking down that shouldn't have like?
That's a good point.
Yeah, if we're gonna map up. Okay,
I gotta go, guys.
Bye, Jeff.
All right.
Bye, Jeff.
Bye, Jeff.
If we're gonna map out stuff that we want to see covered in like flashbacks or anything in the future, I really want to see more of Zarian because I feel like from my side, I now have a very clear picture about Org between the Christmas flashback and the Brandy flashback. And I still am really not sure at all what makes Zarian tick. So definitely
that would be a good list to make of things we want to explore in flashbacks. Braden mentioned finding a way to kind of explain where Balmo and Rakashi's relationship is at the start of play. But more time with Zarian Albhart makes sense. Is there anything else that people can think of for that list? Offhand?
Not immediately.
I think Balmo's going to be kind of dreading paying his cosmic bar tab.
Yes, now Balmo has at least a greater sense of his personal quest, or more information about his personal quest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me and my own curiosity, I'd like to see like what all went down that actually got Rakashi in jail.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. That's definitely kind of like a lingering plot hook.
Which is funny because I always just thought of that as being a sort of straightforward mob thing.
Yeah, but we haven't said that it was a straightforward mob thing on camera in a way that like establishes that. So like officially, that's not what happened.
I think it is. I mean, Vin and I have talked about the why of that. So maybe there are some things that haven't been said on camera, but as far as as far as we're concerned, are as said as if they'd been said on camera.
Okay.
And I think it is still a thing that would be very interesting to explore on camera.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I just think it would be so interesting because Rakashi is one person before this happens and she's someone else after it happens. And so I just think it would just be really fascinating to see.
Yeah, and I mean, our flashback episodes have been things like everybody went out to get some ingredients for dinner, or some people went to a party, or we celebrated Christmas. So like, I feel like we can wring a lot of dramatic heft out of fairly mundane setups, even in that case. And I do have kind of a like 3/4 formulated idea of a flashback I kind of want to do with Latchkey and Balmo at some point to kind of put a little backstory in there, which I might run by you at some point.
Cool.
Might also be interesting to occasionally do like just a sort of side game flashback episode in between, like if Josh wants to take an Old Bones week off, or if someone else needs to,
right,
like squeeze one in there.
Could potentially do that. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a mainstay of our scheduling in college. So like, it's actually kind of funny to me that we haven't gone back to that well yet. But
definitely good stuff. Well, in conclusion, I really enjoyed this season. Thank you all for embracing some of my crazier ideas. And
thank you for having crazy ideas.
Yeah,
it's been fun.
More than we know.
Thank you for letting me take a vacation
so many more.
From DMing to play somebody and cause trouble for somebody else for once.
Yeah.
Happily so. All right. That's what I got. Unless everybody else has some parting thoughts.
Sounds good.
Next season, we're back in the Old Bones.
Next, we're back in the Old Bones. So, Josh, we need, I think, a few things from you.
Yep.
That's it this week and this season for the Chimera. We'll be back in the universe of the Old Bones shortly, but before then we may toss in some supplementary material and a short adventure or two. We're not entirely sure how the schedule is going to work out, so watch the feed for some fun surprises. And as always, thanks for listening.